Aloha. Today I want to give you a basic review of grammar, usage, and mechanics. When I grade assignments in this writing class, these are the most common errors that I find, and so I thought a brief review would be a good help for you. First, with sentences, there are several areas to consider. First is how you write sentences, the construction. Are they made up of clauses? Are they compound sentences, complex sentences? What kind of sentence errors are the most common ones? How do you use commas? How do you use capitalization? And how do you use spelling? This PowerPoint is only the most frequent errors that I see. When I grade your assignments, I don't write on every single error that you have in there. I try to give you a feeling for the kinds of errors that you're making so that you can see what you need to do when you are proofreading and editing your assignment before you turn it in. So be sure to check Appendix B in your textbook that has lots more information on this subject. Now, with sentence construction, every sentence has at least two basic parts: the subject, which is what the sentence is about, and the predicate, which is what the sentence is doing. The subject is a person, place, thing, or idea that is doing or being something, and the predicate explains what that subject does. Here's an example. In this one, the subject is the boy, and the predicate is fought hard. So the sentence would be, the boy fought hard. Or, the entire team hit the line at once. Or, the very thought of going makes me sick. In that case, the subject is that whole phrase, the very thought of going. And what happens is makes me sick. Or the subject is she, and the predicate is won the award. So, check through each of your sentences and make sure you have a clear subject and a clear predicate in them to make sure that you're writing complete sentences. When you proofread, check each sentence and make sure it has at least a subject and a predicate. You can have more information in there, but you have to have at least that much. Okay, now let's talk about clauses. A clause is any group of words that contains a subject and a complete verb. An independent clause is a complete sentence which can stand on its own. For example, the girl went home. In that case, the girl's a subject, went home is a predicate. It's an independent clause. It can stand by itself, or it can be the part of a bigger sentence, a longer sentence. An independent clause with this one could be used to make that longer sentence by saying, after the class was over, which is an introductory element, the girl went home. So after the class was over, the girl went home. Also, a dependent clause is one that can't stand by itself. It depends or leans on an independent clause for its meaning. For example, after the class was over. Now that's a dependent clause. It doesn't give you enough information. So in that case, you need to have more information. Now, a compound sentence is where you combine two independent clauses and you can join them in three different ways. The first way is with a semicolon. With this example, Sherry plays the drums, semicolon, Henry plays the flute. Note that there's not a space before the semicolon and that there is a space after it. Another way that you can join two independent clauses to make a compound sentence is to join them with a coordinating conjunction. There are only 7 coordinating conjunctions. Those coordinating conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. I learned those by remembering the phrase fanboys, where each one of those letters stands for one of the letters of the compound sentences. So for would be F and A, nor, N. So fanboys would be for and nor, but, or, yet, so. Then you can use any one of those to join two independent clauses. When you use a coordinating conjunction to join two independent clauses, you write the first independent clause, Then you write a comma, and then you write the second independent clause. Note that that comma comes immediately after the first independent clause, no spaces, and that there's a space after the comma. So those are examples of compound sentences. Complex sentences have two independent clauses, but they're joined with a semicolon at the end of the first sentence, and at the end of the first independent clause, and then they're joined by a conjunctive adverb, which is set off by commas. Now, they can come in any one of three places in that second part of the sentence, but in any one of those places, there's going to be punctuation on either side. So here's three examples. They went to the beach, semicolon, however, comma, they didn't go swimming. So you have two independent clauses, and in the middle of that, you've got your conjunctive adverb. Now, if you want to break up that second independent clause, you can put the conjunctive adverb in the middle or at the end, but you have to have punctuation on either side. And those examples would be, they went to the beach, semicolon, they didn't, comma, however, comma, go swimming. Or they went to the beach, semicolon, they didn't go swimming, comma, however. Some of the most common conjunctive adverbs used are however, furthermore, instead, in fact, meanwhile, moreover, and otherwise. There's lots more that you can find when you do a quick web search. The key is to using these complex sentences sparingly. Otherwise, it gets in the way of your writing. It makes your writing seem kind of clunky. So make sure that you use them every once in a while when there's something in particular that you want to emphasize. Now, the most common sentence errors that people do, and you'll see these written on your paper if you make that error when you're writing, one of them is fragment and the other one is a run-on sentence. A fragment is an incomplete thought that can't stand on its own. There are a couple of examples there. Wherever she went, that's not a sentence. Or although he liked carrots, also not a sentence. If you don't have a complete subject and predicate, you don't have a sentence. A run-on sentence is when you put two independent clauses together without punctuation. So if you say they went out to dinner, they danced all night, that's two separate thoughts. And you've just jammed them together into one sentence and made it a run-on sentence. So make sure that you correctly punctuate sentences when you join them, and make sure that you've got at least one independent clause in your sentence. Now, commas. Commas are something that are so frequently misused or not used enough of. So make sure that you know these 4 points. If you remember these 4 things about commas, and when you do your proofreading and editing, you check and see that if you use a comma, it's used for one of these purposes, then you'll be all right. And don't put commas if they don't fall into any of these categories. So always use a comma when you start with an introductory element in your sentence. That means something comes before your independent clause, whatever it is. In this case, after the class was over, comma, the students worked in their study groups. In this case, I made an error, it should have been students, but in this case, the students worked in their study groups is the independent clause, and after the class was over is the introductory element. Then another thing is to always use a comma when you join 3 or more items in a list. Sometimes they say that this isn't necessary in some textbooks, or maybe you had a writing teacher before that said it isn't necessary. But if you leave it out, it can lead to confusion. So always include it. It's called the Oxford comma, and it's a very common sentence error. Some editors don't use it when they're like editing books or editing things in the newspaper, so you will see it not used. But you will never be incorrect if you do use it, and it will always lead to better understanding of your writing. So if you have 3 or more items in a list, put that comma after the last item that comes before the and. Like, I love roses, comma, lilies, comma, and orchids. Or use a comma when you have interrupters in your sentence. These can be words or phrases or parenthetical expressions. So something like Professor Harris, comma, the chair of the department, makes the decisions. In that case, you could say Professor Harris makes the decisions and your sentence would be fine. The chair of the department explains who he is, so it's just added information. If you start your sentence with a word like well, comma, I see what you mean, then you need a comma after that well. And if you're just adding a little extra information, you need commas on either side too, like the climate in Maui, comma, comma, is wonderful. And it is. I'm enjoying it right now. Never use a comma unless there's a specific rule to support its use. Capitalization. There's lots of rules for capitalization, but these are the ones that are most frequently used incorrectly. I shouldn't have to say this, but always capitalize the letter I when used as a personal pronoun. I think anymore, especially with all the texting that people do, people get out of the habit of capitalizing that I. And then when you try to transfer that habit into your formal writing, it makes you look careless or sloppy. And you don't want that. You always want your writing that you do to look the very best it can. So always capitalize the letter I when you're referring to a person. You don't capitalize seasons. And you always capitalize words which denote races, nationalities, religions, and languages. That's because it's a name of a race, a name of a nationality, a name of a religion, or a name of a language. So when you're capitalizing the name of something, you need to have a capital letter. Always capitalize the names of particular people, places, and things. Like if you write down Arizona, it's always going to be capitalized. Again, that's going toward the names of things. And then capitalize the titles of books, songs, essays, and poems, so that you can tell that that is the title because it's capitalized. Spelling. This anymore isn't as big of a problem because we've got spell check on computers, and you'll all be writing on computers for this class since it's an online class. However, they miss things, like in that last example that I used there, that I noticed that I didn't put an S on a word. The word was spelled correctly, so I didn't catch it with the spell check. And there's words that have the same sound, but they're spelled differently. Like here and here, you don't want to use the wrong one of those. And if you spelled it correctly, the spell checker's not going to catch it. So it's very important when you edit to go through and make sure that every word that you used was the correct word for the meaning that you want. There's homonyms and homographs are the ones that we've been talking about. You only are going to catch them if you really carefully proofread. And that's the most important thing you need to do before you submit an assignment. First, you make sure it's the very best it can be as far as content. And then you go through and check it very carefully to make sure that you catch any errors. I've discovered that I need to have some space between when I finish writing something and when I read it, or my brain will just assume that it's seeing what I thought I wrote and won't catch the errors. One way you can help with this is to read whatever you wrote backwards, one sentence at a time. And when you're looking at the sentence individually, instead of, for instance, looking at a paragraph in context, you're more likely to catch the errors. So that's a really good way, or just even reading your writing out loud will help. I've just completed writing another book, and one of my friends was looking at it, and she pointed out that I used the word so at the beginning of like 50 sentences in the book, and that was totally unnecessary. And I was so glad that she saw that, because I didn't realize I was doing it, and I was able to go back and fix it because she caught it. So if you have somebody else look at your paper, that can help. But don't count on them. Don't assume that because your best friend looked at the paper that all your errors are taken care of, because they might not know what some of those errors are. And you can go on campus for help in the writing lab if you have problems with proofreading or you want some help. I strongly recommend that you go there and get some help. But again, don't count on them for catching everything. Your writing is ultimately your responsibility. So make sure that everything that you write is exactly what you want it to be. And remember, I'm always here for you. If you've got a question about if you're doing something correctly, or do you need a comma here, or is this sentence complete, or anything like that, send me an example. Just shoot me an email in Canvas, and I check my emails all the time, and I'm happy to get back on you on things like that. I won't read your whole paper for you or assignment for you, whatever it is. I've got way too many students to be able to do that, but I'm happy to read any individual questions that you have, that you can send them to me anytime. So I look forward to seeing how well you learn to proofread and edit in this class, and I'm looking forward to reading your assignments.